pass out these snacks. This is, I'll just see if you can help me. Can you help me pass back? This is one of the most typical Ethiopian snacks. It's roasted barley and peanuts. And it's served with coffee. Every time you drink coffee, you get this or popcorn.
Ah, this is coffee?
And the coffee that's back here is from Ethiopia.
No, you eat it with your coffee. It's barley, roasted
barley and peanuts.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So, just in case anybody else wants.
Did you do this yourself here?
No, I bought it. You can buy it everywhere. It's all over the place because it's the most typical snack. Can you put that on that chair in case anybody else shows up? Oh, do you need any questions? Yes. So I'd like to begin with a word of prayer. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about Ethiopia. I thank you for each person that is here today, and we are grateful that you are with us, and we ask for your blessing on our time together. Amen. Amen. I worked at a Mennonite seminary that began in 1974, about 30 years ago. And in that 30-year time, they've graduated about 2,000 students. The name of the seminary is Meserete Christos Seminary, and the name of the Mennonite church in Ethiopia is Meserete Christos Church. And Meserete Christos means Christ is the foundation. So the seminary is called MKS, Meserete Christos Seminary, MKS. The Mennonite church began in Ethiopia in 1951 when 10 people were baptized by Mennonite missionaries. And then, since then, it's grown very quickly. So because it's a rapidly growing church, there's a great need for church leaders. So that's the mission of this seminary, is to train men and women to be church leaders. I'm going to show you some pictures of campus. This building on the left is the main administrative building where my office was, all the offices are. And then this building is where the classrooms are. This is the main campus green where students play soccer and hang out under this tree. There's a few benches. There's not a lot of place to sit on the campus. But here are students. This is how it looks every time I pass by. This building is the dining hall and chapel, and the kitchen is across the way. And the seminary grows their own food to feed the students. So there are quite a few fields and about a dozen farm workers.
Cynthia?
Yes.
Where is this in Ethiopia? Within Ethiopia, where is this?
Where is it? It's in central Ethiopia. I'll show you on a map.
It's not in Addis Ababa or one of the major cities?
Let's see, I'll show you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay, you can interrupt. This is Addis Ababa, the capital, and the seminary is about 30 kilometers south of that, but it takes about 2 hours. And then this shows where students come from. I'll show you another map in a minute. These milking cows are grazing right behind the guest house where I lived, and they actually graze all over campus. They're just wandering along with the students. The milk is used as a benefit to give employees because their salary is not very high. Students don't have milk, there's no milk in the cafeteria, so it's primarily for employees. And this is one picture of inside my apartment. This is the living room, and I had a big dining table where I did all my work, and then there's a bedroom and a kitchen. These are some staff people. They are preparing a new soccer field. And this is a group of faculty and administrative staff. There were 14 full-time faculty, including me, for a student body of about 200 each semester. Next on my, starting here now is English language. So all seminary classes are taught in English. And one of the main reasons for that is because the theological books available are in English. The students have all had an English background in high school. Their classes were all in English, but they learned about English, but they never learned how to use English. Their level is quite weak. I have some examples over here. The examples are from the end of the semester, and if you look at them, you can appreciate what I was challenged by. But that's my job. So my task was to help them practice and actually use English. Here's an example of student writing that was pretty good, pretty high. I gave the students a dictation about myself. My name is Cynthia Yoder. I am from the USA. They wrote that down by listening, and then at home they had to change it to third person. My teacher's name is Cynthia Yoder. She has come from USA, but she lived in Mexico. She has married, but doesn't have children. She have 2 sisters and 1 brother. She have 7 nieces and nephews. She has an English teacher. She likes reading, singing, walking. So next, a little about my teaching. 2 of my great challenges were large classes and very few resources. I had one class of 54, one class of 43, and a tiny class of 21. I ended up splitting the biggest class into 2, and I taught extra hours so that that class was no longer 54. That was a really good move. I had 118 students, so my initial challenge was learning their names. Name cards helped. I made name cards for every student and took all their pictures, and I studied them at home, especially before going to class. And by about week 4, I knew everybody's names and eliminated the cards from their desks. The meaning of names is an important part of the culture, and so when people would introduce themselves or another person, they would always want to say the meaning of their name. So I'll tell you the meanings of these guys' names. I worked on getting all of them, but I certainly don't remember them. Kabebe means surround or covered. This is Ficado. His nickname is Fikr.
Is this Amharic?
Yes. Fikr means love. His name is Girma. Girma means glory or presence, such as the Holy Spirit's presence. And Feyisa, his nickname is Fayo, means healer.
Cynthia, do they know, do people know what those words mean without having to have them defined for them?
You mean in English?
No, no, in
American.
Okay, I believe so, because the meanings are such an important part of the culture. I'll give you the three more names that I have here. Jirenya means life. Misgana means thanks. So when I'm in an Ethiopian church, you're singing Misgana, Misgana. It's thank God, thank God. That's a really recognizable word, and that's his name. And Shamba, I forget, means authority. So I have this whole list, and it was fun getting to know my students that way, trying to ask about the meanings of their names.
Were there only men in the classes?
I'll tell you in a second. Looks like it.
Yes.
Now I want to talk about a few resources. The classroom didn't have any projector for teachers to use. There were no textbooks for students to use, so I created my own materials, and the college told me I was going to have to pay for them because they didn't have any money. And later, I guess they felt sorry for me because I had purchased my own ticket and my own visa, and I had all these expenses. And so then after we added up the first month's bill, I was supposed to pay like $300, and the administration decided that they would cover the cost for my teaching materials. I wanted each student to have a packet, so I created packets for each student, about 20 pages, writing and grammar, and that is the textbook that I used in each class. So the classrooms look like this. There's a whiteboard. Lots of the whiteboards don't work well. The markers don't work well either. And then there are desks and chairs, and that's it. And lots of them are wobbly and broken. The windows are also broken. Birds are flying in. There's poop on the windowsills. Curtains don't open and close, but no one seems to mind, just me. I tried to make my classes as interactive as possible. And students were so appreciative. They said, "We've never had a teacher like you before. We never practiced English like this before." They had to write and rewrite their paragraphs, so I was constantly giving feedback on their writing. And so one student, I just loved what he said. He said, "I feel joyful because you are teaching us how to edit our writing. No teacher taught us that before." So they were always thanking me, and there was my great reward. A bit more about my students. They were mostly in their 20s, but about 20% were in their 30s, and a handful in their 40s and 50s. Many were already pastors or evangelists in their home churches, and their churches were supporting them financially to get more training. Maybe they hadn't had any training to begin with. Only 10% were women. And when I found this out, I was a bit shocked. But when I told some Mennonites who had worked in Ethiopia for some years, they told me that 10% is progress. Most came from rural areas, many from homes with no running water, no indoor plumbing. Many come from farmer families, so they might have a few cows, sheep, and goats, and they raise crops mostly to feed their own family. Farmer families on average make $100 a month, and they come from large families, so the students that I worked with were relatively poor. It wasn't uncommon to have 8, 9, 10 siblings. One student had 17. But there were also some smaller families. So my husband, with 8 brothers, would have fit right in. My next topic is home visits. This map shows how large Ethiopia is. And the population is, I think, about 112 million. This map shows the main regions or ethnic groups in Ethiopia. And so the seminary is somewhere around here. And a lot of my students come from Oromia, which stretches over here, and some come from southern nations, and then a smattering come from all over. We also had some South Sudanese refugees, 2 of them, and some Eritrean refugees.
Do the ones from
Oromia?
do they speak Amharic or Oromo?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Their native language is Oromo, and maybe 10 or 20% speak Amharic, and the rest don't. So in a class, the teacher is supposed to be speaking in English. But if the students don't understand, some teachers will ask a student to translate into Oromo because the teacher doesn't speak Oromo. And then the teacher might ask or say themselves the content in Amharic. So it's pretty multilingual. It's really interesting that way. So there's a lot of ethnic conflict, and it's really complex. I find it hard to really understand, but there's a lot of fighting and violence, and the roads aren't safe. And so a lot of my students come from Western Oromia, and there's a lot of fighting there. So they stayed on campus the whole semester because it's too dangerous. And one day in class, I had a student wanted to take a phone call, and I said, no, not during class. Later, I felt bad because he told me 80 people had been killed in his village, and his wife was calling to tell him that. So it's a reality that people are dying. And anyway, because of that situation, I was not able to visit any students in their home. But I was invited to the homes of seminary faculty and staff. This is the first home I visited, the home of Asifa, who was the maintenance man on campus. His home had a dirt floor, no indoor plumbing, and all the kids slept with mom and dad in the same bed. So when I went there, I was ushered into a tiny space about double the size of this table, and that's where I sat, and they served food, and we ate together and talked. They were such a happy family. I visited them quite a number of times and appreciate the chance to get to know them. Asifa's wife, Elam, introduced me to the coffee ritual in Ethiopia. And the reason I brought coffee today is because coffee is so important in Ethiopia. It's the top export, the #1 export. And this ritual is done in her home 3 times a day. It takes about 30 minutes. And the ritual happened in homes, and it also happened on campus. Every afternoon, someone was making coffee in this manner. So first you roast the beans on a fire on the floor. I don't have a picture of that. And then you grind the beans in a mortar and pestle. And then you boil water. And then you mix the water with the coffee grounds several times until you get it just right. And if you can see, they put greenery always on the floor, even on the campus at the seminary. Even in the airport, when I was flying to Ethiopia, they did a coffee ceremony because it was Ethiopian New Year, and they put this greenery, plastic greenery on the floor. So that symbolizes the rural area. So I got to experience this many times. And as I maybe mentioned, It's served with the snack, the barley snack, or it's served with popcorn. And I found that very, very interesting.
Do they finally strain the grounds out?
They stay in the bottom
Okay.
of the jibena, the pot. So I have a few pictures of other homes that I visited. Usually I was served a meal. Here I stayed overnight.
When you stayed overnight, did you sleep with everybody?
No, that was a more modern family. I had my own, I used one of the kids' bedrooms. And this woman is a faculty member on campus, and she's wearing traditional Ethiopian garb, which I'm wearing just a small part of that. So my next topic on my outline is injera. Injera is the staple food in Ethiopia. Can you raise your hand if you've eaten injera and walked Ethiopian food? Sharon, yes? Okay, I wish I knew how to make it to serve you.
I just know it's really spicy.
Yes, it can be. It's like a spongy pancake served with several kinds of stews called wat. So it's injera and wat. And here on this table, you can see on our plates, we all have injera. It's on the bottom, and the stew's on the top, and then more injera is rolled up to use your hands. You don't use silverware. Injera is made from a grain called teff. This is a teff field. It looks kind of like wheat, so it was hard for me to distinguish between wheat fields and teff fields. Here's a picture, a stack of injera made on campus in the kitchen.
Looks like tortillas.
Kind of, yeah. And there are two women working in what's called the injera house. It's in a very small space. They have 4 griddles. And they make 200 or more injeras every day to feed the students. These are the legumes that are used to make the stews. Chickpeas and split peas and lentils. These are chickpeas drying in the sun. Then they will be ground into a powder. So the chickpeas are generally ground into a powder. They don't put whole chickpeas in their stews. So it's a one-dish meal, eaten with your hand. You take a piece of injera and scoop it up and pop it in your mouth. Try not to get your fingers too dirty, always with your right hand. This is yellow split peas and a red sauce. The one is kind of greenish is a chickpea, brown chickpea stew, and then brown lentils on the left. Our meals were all vegetarian, except for one day a week, Monday lunch, we had ox meat. And here's a picture of the ox meat stew on the right, and it was always served with potatoes and carrots. That was a special day. And it didn't start until about 6 weeks into the semester. I guess because there's not enough money, and but then someone finally decided it's time to have some meat. So I always look forward to Mondays. And we never had chicken.
Was there a reason for that?
Just cost. Yeah. So 4 times a week we had the same meal each time. Tuesday lunch, Friday dinner, etc. We had pasta, spaghetti, and it was served with a vegetarian sauce made from grated carrots. And then it was always served with, they called it a salad. Here it's cooked potatoes, and they are pink because they were cooked with beets. And they also made a cabbage salad commonly, but it was also cooked cabbage. They called it salad. And once in a while we had fresh tomatoes. That's the only raw vegetable that we ever had. So we had water to drink and no dessert, never any fruit, just the one dish meal. It was simple, tasty, and nutritious, but I did get really tired of eating with my hand, and it really alarmed me one night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and I could smell what on my hands, and I realized I need to try to scrub more thoroughly. So that was a challenge for me. While eating in Jera, I had wonderful interactions with people. I ate with faculty about 2 times a week. There's a small cafe on campus, and students or faculty can carry their food from the dining hall or from the kitchen into the cafe. But most of the time, I ate in the dining hall with students. This is the dining hall. So I loved eating with students. I think everybody's gone now, that's why it's empty, and they look like they're finished with their food, but we were having a chat. So my students asked many questions. How is Ethiopia? How is your family? What makes you happy? What food is popular in America? And when I said pizza, one student said, "What's that?" How can I improve my English? When did you come to the Lord? What is your ministry in church? I ask my students questions also about their families, their farms, their churches, their goals for the future. With stew all over my fingertips and theirs, because you kind of sit there talking like this and your hand is all red from the stew. We had many meaningful conversations. Students also eat outside, and I happened to have lunch on Sunday with these 2 guys just by chance, and then we started doing it each week. And here is where you wash your hands after eating. There's no soap. I'll talk about that in a minute. I also got to interact with these wonderful women, the kitchen staff who cook and serve the meals 3 times a day. They were the first people I met when I arrived on campus. They became my cherished friends, even though we couldn't communicate all that well. And in this picture, we're having coffee. You can see they use the small demi-tasse cups, and you can see the bowl of popcorn that's served with coffee. It was with these women that I got to practice Amharic language the most. My next topic is the Orthodox Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. About 65% of Ethiopia is Christian and 35% is Muslim. And of the Christians, 2/3 are Orthodox. These are Orthodox women. I went to a festival that's celebrating the cross. So 2/3 of the Christians are Orthodox and 1/3 are evangelicals or Protestants, and Mennonites are part of that Protestant group. They call them evangelicals usually in Ethiopia. So this is an evangelical, it happens to be a Mennonite church. The Lutheran church is one of the biggest churches in Ethiopia, and the Baptists and then Pentecostal churches are very popular. And this church is pretty large as well, but I don't know how they're all relative to each other in terms of population. The main goal of Meseret de Christos Church and the seminary where I worked is to preach the gospel, to bring people to Christ, and to save their souls. This includes people in the Orthodox tradition. If you're Orthodox, you need to be saved. That's according to my students and the people with whom I worked. So there's sometimes tension between Orthodox and evangelicals. Not a lot of interfaith dialogue, although I think it's changing these days. But I want to give a couple examples about the Orthodox Church. This student named Chala came to my office one day asking for money to support his studies the next semester. And he comes from an Orthodox family, and because of that, they don't support him, they don't agree with his being at a evangelical seminary, so they don't help him financially, and he doesn't have any source of income on his own. I'm not sure the percentage, but a lot of my students come from Orthodox families and at some point became Christians or became evangelicals. Another more poignant story is of Tigist, who was a woman on faculty. These are two faculty women. I think you saw the other one, there are three. And this is Tigist in the gray. Though you cannot see it, she has a large scar extending all across the left side of her face. She loves sharing her testimony, beginning with, the reason I have this scar on my face is, so when Tigist was a senior in high school, she accepted Jesus into her heart because a friend told her about Jesus' love. Well, her family, who was Orthodox, were very upset. They chased her out of the house. Her aunt organized a group of people who beat her with rubber and burned her with fire. And she then spent the next several years getting treatments, including 4 plastic surgeries, but she still had a disfigured face. She went to the US for a couple years. With all these procedures, she was supported by churches. She went to the US, had more treatments, and when she was in the US, she was able to give her testimony in many places, which she also does in Ethiopia, and she also gives her testimony with her students. So it's the most amazing story. One time she was in New York and 50 young people, she was at a youth retreat, 50 young people accepted Christ, and 20 others renewed their commitment because of her amazing story. So those two examples just reminded me of how passionate my students and the seminary is about their mission.
Cynthia, the Orthodox don't believe in Christ?
Well, that's a theological discussion. If I could summarize what I learned, it would be that the Orthodox believe in Christ and they worship God the same way we do, but they don't know Jesus as Savior and friend. Whereas the evangelicals, yes, have a personal Savior. This leads me to my next topic, which is prayer. After my first day of class, a student wrote on the information form I gave them a chance to ask me a question. How you don't start class by praying God? Wow, was I stunned and humbled and was afraid that all my students thought I was a heathen. So I began praying in class each day. On the information form, the students also wrote their hobbies. Many wrote reading the Bible, preaching the gospel, and praying as their hobbies. And that was a first for me. And I actually tried to get them to come up with some other more normal hobbies, which some of them played soccer, listened to music, etc. But it was then that I began to understand what I called my students' religious fervor. Once a month was prayer and fasting day on campus. This is a picture of the chapel on campus, and it's on the other end of the dining hall. This is the dining hall, that's the chapel. And because it's 200 students, the students would sit all over this building for chapel. Well, whether I liked it or not, my classes were canceled, and students met from 6 a.m. till 12 to pray once a month. And I thought they needed more English practice. They thought they needed more prayer. Chapel happened 3 times a week, and on Tuesdays it was English chapel. My role was to lead singing and teach English songs. I did a Zoom so you can see me. Guy is helping me on a keyboard, and I have the words on the screen here. So what I did was I took my ukulele to my classes, and I taught my students. They had a handout. I taught them about 8 simple songs with simple lyrics that I learned from high school, like "This is the Day" or "God is so good." This song on the screen is "Open Our Eyes, Lord." And in class, they learned the words and the tunes, and then in chapel, they could help teach the whole group. So in class, when I first brought my ukulele, I got a huge round of applause because students were just so happy, I guess, and they were all getting out their phones and taking videos of me singing. And then after my first day leading music in chapel, usually with a guitar, but not always, students said, "God bless you, teacher, God bless you, Cynthia," all afternoon and into the evening. I got more God bless yous than I've ever received in my life that day. They were so appreciative of the simplest things. And it was wonderful being part of the whole community, and it was delightful teaching in my classes. The most amazing experience related to prayer was when my mom died. She died in November. This is her engagement picture. Her name is Theo. Theo means loves God, and it's related to theology, so I was happy that my mom had a name that my students would be happy to hear. This is her graduation from college, nursing. This is the last picture that my family took before my mother got sick. And this is the last picture I have of me and my mother. It was taken on Mother's Day last year. So after Mom died, I taught my classes that week because I had to wait on a new visa, and my passport was at immigration in Addis Ababa. I was a little bit nervous, but I couldn't buy tickets and we couldn't plan the memorial service till I had my passport back in hand. And so I decided to teach. And what I did was I did a slideshow about my mom, and I showed, okay, remember I didn't have a projector, so I had these huge classes. I just took my laptop and showed the pictures. And I was gonna try to do that with you today so you could feel what it's like, but it was too complicated. So I told them about her faith, her life, our relationship, and things I learned from her. And of course I cried, and they cried while I was talking. It was so touching. And then I asked them if they would please pray for me and my family. And so I sat down in front of them, and I listened while they prayed. And I took a picture in each class, and I told the students the reason I took the picture is because I want to share these pictures with my family and tell them you prayed for them and show them what it looked like and what it felt like. They prayed individually, many out loud, some softly, some shouting out to God, some singing, some praying in tongues, all at the same time, each person praying their own prayers for my family. Mennonites in Ethiopia have a Pentecostal influence, and they definitely pray from the heart. That week I was just overwhelmed by love, and it's an experience that I'll never forget and that I will always cherish. After that week I went home for the memorial service, and then I came back, and then I showed pictures of the funeral and my family, and the students were so shocked, and so were the faculty, that I came back, because they figured that I would just go home and there were only 4 more weeks, and they really didn't think I would come back. So my coming back, which I thought about not coming back, but my coming back assured them that I cared about them and was committed to them. So my mom's death had a big impact on me and on the campus. Next, I'd like to talk about interdependence and independence. This is a book I read to help me understand the different perspectives of Africans and Westerners. Africans are interdependent. In general, they rely on each other. And we Westerners, in general, are independent. We rely on ourselves. I struggled with poverty all around me and how to respond when people asked me for things. I was asked for money. I was asked to print something for my students on the printer in my office. I was asked for a pen. Lots of students came to class without working pens. I was asked for new shoes, for a laptop, and could I find a sponsor for them from, the West or from my country to sponsor their whole education. The cost for a student per semester is about a little over $2,000, and students must pay a tenth of that, $200. So that's the hard part, coming up with $200. And then the seminary provides most of the rest of the money. A lot of help from donors abroad. So I struggled with these things, and one difficult day was when this student in the middle, his name is Pharrell, he came with a cheek the size of a baseball. And I asked him, have you been to the doctor? And he said, no, I don't have money. And then I said, have you been to the clinic? Is there a nurse? Is there a clinic on campus? And he said, we don't have one. So I was a bit distraught, and I went to the faculty table at lunch, and I said, what is this guy supposed to do? How can we help him? So they directed me to a student leader, student representative, and I told him about the situation, and the next day, sure enough, he was collecting donations from faculty and students, and Pharrell was able to go to the doctor, and his swelling, his problem was solved. Another time, a group of students collected donations for about 50 students on campus, which was about 25% of our student body. They didn't have money to buy even a pen or notebook or soap. And there's no soap in the bathrooms, there's no toilet paper in the bathrooms, and we're eating with our hands. They're not using toilet paper. I don't really understand how that works and don't want to know. But I know the importance of soap. And so this student group apparently every semester collects money, and I was able to provide these basic supplies to the students who are poorer. So I learned how interdependence works. My students rely on each other, and when they have needs, and they're not afraid to ask for help. Those who can, do help. It's, as it was explained in the book, it's kind of like the African social security system. I also had a hard time with things that I thought were lacking in the seminary. For example, the toilet down the hall from my office ran the whole 4 months I was there. My own shower felt like a dribble. This is my shower at home. The water and electricity went off a lot. I had to take sponge baths. I had to keep water source and then do sponge baths. Every classroom had wobbly and broken desks and chairs. Our food was the same over and over. But again, I guess I was the only one who minded. Nobody else thought about it or minded. When I had my students write a paragraph about what they liked about Nazareth de Cristo Seminary, they had many good things to say, including good teachers, good food, good water, because they don't have water at home, good equipment. They thought MKS was great. Well, I thought about the things that it needed. So I spent a lot of time pondering these two different perspectives. Lastly, I want to mention Amharic, which is the national language. This is Bethlehem, and she was on staff in the registrar's office, and she became my Amharic teacher. Betty and I, she gave me this, what I'm wearing, which is a traditional Ethiopian shawl. She and I spent a couple hours together each week informally, whenever we both had time, and I learned from her not only language but culture. Here are a few fun things about Amharic. Number one, Ethiopians are expressive. My students often told me, I love you so much. In Amharic, it's Owadishalo. Well, I love you is not a typical expression from student to teacher in my culture. Number two, nothing seems to be a problem in Ethiopia. As in many cultures, they have a similar expression. I heard Chigger Yelam, or it's no problem, every single day. I wish I were as easygoing. Number three, a common response to how are you is thank God. In Amharic, Ziapir Imisgan. Ethiopians express gratefulness to God often and directly. Number four, Batam means very. My students would say, I very thank you. God is very help me. My college writing teacher, Omar Ebi, told us never to use the word very because he thought it was meaningless. But in Ethiopia, Batam can be added to almost any sentence. Sorry, Omar. And number five, another high frequency word is ishi, which means okay. I just love the sound of that word, ishi. So that's the end of my talk. I very love you. I very thank you for listening. And now I very welcome your questions or comments. I think we have about 5 minutes. Yes, Ken?
I'm guessing the students were pretty motivated.
Oh, extremely motivated, yes.
And what did they do with their English? I mean, were they preaching in English? What was the advantage for them to have?
Right, it's a good question, because personally I think they should be doing their classes in Amharic because they're gonna be preaching in Amharic. But because of those theological books, they're reading in the library English books and they're writing their papers in English. So all the faculty are struggling through ungrammatical sentences and having a hard time figuring out how to grade the students because of that. Sharon?
I just want to say how much respect I have for you and envy that you had this experience. I had an almost equal experience, but I was in my mid-20s. And I mean, it was a challenge to me, being a spoiled American kid, you know, who went to North Africa. But my gosh, I'm very envious, but I have so much respect for you, and it's obvious that you did an excellent job working with what you had. And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you, Sharon. Well, it was truly a joy. It was pretty hard, partly because I was no longer 20. And I did struggle like mentally because things bothered me, like in my apartment. It was filled with cockroaches, hard to get rid of them, no water. And I kind of berated myself for getting down about these things. That was my biggest struggle, was like berating myself. So yeah, I did think about these things a lot, and maybe being 62 had something to do with it. Ellen?
Was there any water, like streams or rivers or
There are some lakes in the area, and there's a lake not too far from campus that those two girls that I showed you went walking with me to the lake. It dries up in the dry season, and you can walk across it. So there are lakes in that area, and the campus also has a well. But so why there was no water a lot of times, I'm not sure. Just that it wasn't functioning properly. I didn't have a chance to visit most tourist places like the lakes or like Lalibela, as you've mentioned, partly because I was just so busy and focused on my classes, and partly because it's not safe in the roads, and I just didn't have the time.
Did they ever mention Lalibela or which is supposed to have the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that all our conversations focused on the church and ministry, and, you know, I tried to get students to talk about other things, but I did occasionally ask them, where should I go in Ethiopia to visit, and so some would mention Lalibela, but most of my students had never been there. So that's also interesting to think about. Kathy?
You worked there last semester. How do they usually handle, and is there a new teacher that comes in each semester? So
Yeah,
it's hard
there's-
for them to get continuity then.
Right. So they mostly have Ethiopian teachers teaching English, and I did look at their materials, and I kind of interviewed students to find out what they learned in their classes, and almost all the teachers that they've ever had never had them practicing, never had them writing and rewriting. So if they had them write, the teacher would collect their paragraph and never turn it back. So they never had a chance to improve their writing and make it better, which just hurt my heart so bad. So, I mean, in my ideal world, I could be a teacher trainer. I've done that in some countries I've lived, and help with some ideas, some simple ideas. And so the university, the seminary was open to my ideas. I suggested a total restructuring, and I laid it out, and right now I'm working on a curriculum and materials for 4 different levels. And but they want me to come back and implement it. So right now the Mennonite church is looking for a volunteer who has English teaching expertise who could go. If the Mennonite church finds somebody, then I don't need to think about, is that going to be me? And I would like to go back, but I know it was hard, and Bob doesn't want to go with me, and so I have to leave him again. And so I don't know. I'm in communication with the college, but yeah, your question is great, because unfortunately they need good English teachers and haven't had them for most of their 30 years. Jeannie?
How was that the school affected by COVID if they didn't have any medical treatment or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think they did remote learning because the students didn't have, so they're behind, and it was confusing. A student would tell me what semester they began, but then because of COVID, you know, their graduation date was going to be delayed. So there was maybe a year where they did not have classes at all, and then they started classes again, and they were wearing masks. They are proud of the fact that not many people have had COVID, or they don't know anybody who's had COVID. Of course, I don't think that's true, but that's kind of the mentality. So when I arrived, I was wearing a mask, and I was wearing a mask to class, but I was the only person on campus with a mask, so I decided, well, I'm gonna stop wearing my mask. And I did not know anybody who got COVID while I was there. Yes.
Did you know ahead of time when you left, before you left Mexico, that you had to develop your own curriculum and make all those pamphlets and everything? Or did you find out once you got there?
I found out that there were no books, and so I had started thinking about what I might do. I took 24 small whiteboards and 60 markers that students could use in small groups. That was a big hit because they've never, touched a whiteboard before. And yeah, so I had time to kind of ponder what I might do, but it took me getting there and giving them diagnostic tests to really see what their language is like. And then I spent a weekend hardly sleeping. I set my alarm for 3 a.m. 2 days in a row. to get this packet finished so I could get copies run, so I could start class the next week. So, and now that's the materials that I'm working on now are just improving what I had, but I had one set and now I'm making 4 different sets. Yes, Luke?
Is the Peace Corps in Ethiopia?
I don't know, I assume so.
The reason I ask is because when our son was in the Peace Corps in Bangladesh, his job was to teach English teachers how to teach English. And
Yes.
that's what he did
Yes.
in the district he was in. And I think that's fairly common, that's why I wondered if.
Yes. Well, it's common with several programs. Peace Corps, I worked with the State Department program doing the same thing in Romania and in Sri Lanka. And I would love to have that job here in Mexico and also in Ethiopia. So it's something that I asked you about, but I never went to the Ministry of Education to have a conversation because, you know, it needs to come from the Ministry of Education, not an outsider like me. But I hope that it's happening in Ethiopia.
One more question. Is there interaction between the people like your students and the other 35% of the country that are Muslim?
That's a good question. Do they have interaction with Muslims and with Orthodox? And I would say generally yes, but it depends where they were raised and where they went to school. So most of them, yes, would have friends who were Muslim or Orthodox. So I don't think they try to be separated that way, but they spend most of their time in church functions. So they're mostly now with evangelicals.
Because I think the right hand business of eating with your right hand, I think that's from the Muslims. Because you do something else with your left hand.
Well, I think it's the same in Ethiopia. I don't know if it comes from Muslim
That's because
tradition
the
or
left
not.
hand is used to go when you go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
With any, I don't know, understanding of the conflict with the people in Tigray or the Tigray region and that whole conflict?
Well, I tried to understand the political situation, but I really couldn't get a good grasp of it. So the main problem is, I'll try to find my map.
Cynthia, I've studied a lot about Ethiopian history because this sounds crazy, but when I was 10 years old, I met Haile Selassie, who was my same height with all his medals. But I have a great respect for Haile Selassie. I'm not a Rastafarian at all, but their problem tends to be more tribal, which we cannot understand. You just can't understand it. But that is why it is so complicated. They have like 80 languages in Ethiopia because everyone is part of a tribe.
So they have 85 ethnic groups and languages, and now it's going by itself, so I don't know what to do. Okay. I'm almost to the map. Thank you, Dennis, for coming. So Tigray is in the north, and the main problem is between the governments and the main government and Tigray. So when I talk, but there's a lot of other ethnic fighting, as Sharon says. So when I talk to people about it, the first thing the faculty people wanted to tell me was that the Westerners don't understand because the news media makes the conflict sound like the Amhara are fighting against Tigray. And in fact, Tigrayans are at fault. They're the ones who are causing the problem. So everybody, these Christians, these Mennonites, wanted to tell me who was at fault. So that's when I realized early on that there's not a lot of dialogue about peace yet. But there was one faculty who teaches peace and development, and he studied in a Mennonite seminary in the States. I had a couple conversations with him. But yeah, it's a huge topic. It's one that I don't understand that well. Thank you, Sharon.
What country is directly to the north?
Eritrea is to the north, And Eritreans have their own persecution. Christians there are being persecuted. So we had 6 refugees on our campus from Eritrea, 6 Eritrean students.
And that's the richest part of the country.
Okay.
Economically, that's where all the, the resources, minerals, just lots of things, and that's why there's.
Integrated in what?
Or in Eritrea. Eritrea is a separate country.
Eritrea now is a separate country. In the past, it was not.
Is which part of being predominantly Muslim?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. I should know, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think.
Maybe I was gonna say Somali.
The south eastern part is more, has most of the Muslims.
So we have one student from Somaliland, and she always asked me to pray for her family because they were Muslim and they were not saved.
But I believe even the Orthodox, a lot of them practice that, what we call genital mutilation, or, it's not just the Muslims there, it's also.
Oh, yes.
It's a cultural thing more than a religious.
So the female faculty, who are 3, I got to know each one of them. A couple of them, their focus was on violent practices against women, including genital mutilation, but many other practices, including early marriage and all kinds of stuff that's just still happening today. Well, I thank you so much for coming. If you haven't had a chance to see the display table, there's some student writing there. You can pick this stuff up and look at it if you want to. And the songs that we did in chapel, the newsletter that goes out to donors in the West, and like what kinds of theology classes the students have. A bag I bought made in Ethiopia, and my blog posts. So on your sheet, I put my email address. If you have any questions, you can email me. And I also put my blog URL. And when I was in Ethiopia, I wrote 10 blog posts. I can email you those 10 with the dates so that it's not confusing to find them if you're interested. And my blog is about living in other countries. So I started it actually in Mexico in 2010 when I was here for a short period of time. I might as well promote my work. So many of you may not know that I have written a memoir. A few of you have read it. And I hope to be able to share this with you sometime. This is about my 5 years teaching in Palestine. Not related to Ethiopia at all. My husband and I like to sing together. This is our first CD, and we are working on our second. If you're interested, let me know. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.